I like Thomas Aquinas at the moment. I think he's very inspirational to me, given what we're going through. And that's not because his particular ideas of religion or God or unmoved movers are particularly inspirational to me, and I don't even think they were necessarily right. But he was introducing aspects of the scientific method during one of the darkest periods in human history when we had lost all hope and reason and ability to think logically. So I think he was really something of a light in the dark.
Dearest Zev, Thomas, as bastion of science and reason during times of turmoil, is a sweet and sincere position. One observation. You say Aquinas preserves our, quote, ability to think logically, which kept us from the, and I quote, darkest period in human reason. That he was a light in the dark, you say. 3 observations. 1. All language reduces at the foundational level to metaphor. Search the etymological root of any word yourself. You'll see. Hence, why the propositional form, out of which both science and philosophy are constructed, is also the architect of the craft of poetry. This should make us very suspicious of the tightness of the ship of science and philosophy, if it is built out of the same boards as poetry. 2. You yourself even employ metaphor to describe the era in which Aquinas lived as dark. Not literally dark, right? Spiritually, like a metaphor, and him as light. Your poetic metaphor mirrors identically the origin of the modern conception of reason, the thing you believe Aquinas was preserving, in the poem known as the Allegory of the Cave. In Plato's Allegory of the Cave, this is the exact same metaphor. One is trapped in the dark, seeing only shadows, until the light of reason shines upon us. Then one returns to the cave to free other prisoners of the darkness with the light of reason. 3. Since all language is metaphor, what do we make of terms like logic and reason? Logic, etymological roots, logos, the word, great, words, poems, metaphors, deceptions, that will get us to capital T truth. And reason, etymological roots, reckon, to count. Begin counting, Zev. Begin counting, and I will stop you when you reach the end of counting. The conclusion of all counting. Oh, wait. Reason, counting, is merely a ruler, a measuring stick, and calculations end somewhere. Logic and reason? Words and counting? Which is more a solid foundation upon which to build your structure of philosophy? That of the poetry and metaphor boards of language, or the endless consecutive self-repetition of counting? Wittgenstein places a Nietzsche epigraph as the opening line to his philosophical investigations. The trouble about progress is that it always looks much greater than it really is.
Well, with regard to Nietzsche, I think Yeats might have said that he's the worst. He was certainly filled with passionate intensity.
Was that a compliment? He was the worst, or a criticism?
Yates had this big line that the best lack all conviction, the worst are filled with passionate intensity. If you think about Nietzsche's philosophy, he was very opposed to any sort of acceptance of what one had. One should always envy those who have more. I think it's very difficult to be truly happy if the thing which you pride yourself most on is never being satisfied.
Never satisfied? When I think of Nietzsche's passionate intensity, his dissatisfaction, I think of his mother doing his laundry for him, his sister doting and caring for him, the intense genius, no warrior, a shut-in, a hash-eater, an opium smoker. I once met an old man who changed my understanding of Nietzsche forever by observing, for a man so obsessed with power, Nietzsche sure was sickly. Zev grasped fully the utility of fantasy to the ailing individual. See Paul in the Catholic Church. And I spent my time in universities being taught Nietzsche by others who tried to systematize him, the poor unsystematizable fantasizer, and it is a bloody mess. Nietzsche is poetry, and I quote, "I mistrust all systematizers. The will to a system is a lack of integrity." Then people would try to tell me what Nietzsche, quote-unquote, said. I can find countless, endless lines which contradict each other. Want Nietzsche praising Jews? I've got you covered. Nietzsche reviling Jewish instincts? Got that covered too. Powerful statements about woman's naturalness being God's gift to reality? Check. Misogynist remarks about the immediate women around him, save perhaps Cosima Wagner? Also check. This is why Nietzsche is dangerous in the hands of professorial systematizers, because Nietzsche is a poem he wrote for himself in order to survive his sickness. Heidegger, in Poetry, Language, Thought, in the section The Origin of the Work of Art, details the act of Van Gogh creating a painting of a pair of boots. He wonders at it. What does it mean, this painting of boots? Heidegger observes, painting is both a verb and a noun. We cannot separate the noun from the verb, the physical object from the act of engagement with creation specific to the artist. The painting means nothing divorced from Van Gogh. That is the lesson from Heidegger we must take when we attempt to interpret artists' work as if their work stood apart from them once they have died, ceased to live. We cannot separate art and artist. Van Gogh was not trying to capture Platonic shoe form. He was playing a game with himself. So was Nietzsche. So, if we try to understand his boot apart from the reasons for its production, suddenly we have divorced the sick genius artist men from their sickness. Now floats a Platonic, systematizable Nietzsche. A Platonic Van Gogh boot rises before us.
I think also with his amoralism, there is no good or evil. I sort of disagree with that on a pretty fundamental basis.
Nietzsche's work is castigating, moralizing. He himself takes a tone frankly reminiscent of sermonizing. By re-evaluating all values, he dictates what he believes is good and evil. Nietzsche does not say there is no good or evil. He says beyond, as in to understand that there are shifting biological poles founded in language, a moving metric, as it were, which changes over time, serving life's preservation overall. We know not the stories and values of the peoples who do not exist. The Kantian attempts to find a firm objective morality were over for serious thinkers.
Evil, in being anathema to that good, must therefore be the opposite of stable in whatever way that it's evil. And that means that good will always be more stable than evil. And the only way evil can really win is if everyone dies.
Here, I think you are correct. Good serves life. I think always of the vegetarian Indians who worship cattle. Why is it good, per se? Is it true? Well, if you are a starving person, perhaps it is better to live off of the dairy of the cow and mark it as sacred because it will allow you and your family to survive, to proliferate, despite any notion of the objective trueness of the cow's holiness. Good and evil serves life. To say eating cow is evil in this biological environment is sensible, as resources are sparse, and the ability to produce a family on dairy outweighs the ability to produce one on just meat alone. Thus, the metaphysic proliferates, and there are more descendants of those who worship cattle.
I think this is the greatest argument for objectivity, is that something that is objectively true cannot be true to me and untrue to you. You can feel that it's untrue, but that would be unproductive and create unnecessary tension and conflict.
Is there a rhinoceros in the room? One of the earliest encounters between Bertrand Russell and the young Ludwig Wittgenstein involved a discussion about whether there was a rhinoceros in their room. Apparently, when Wittgenstein refused to admit that it was certain that there was not a rhinoceros in the room, Russell, half-jokingly, looked underneath the desk to prove it, but to no avail. My German engineer, I think, is a fool, concluded Russell. He thinks nothing empirical is knowable. I asked him to admit that there was not a rhinoceros in the room, but he wouldn't.
I think this is one reason for the importance of science as a tool for stability.
Never forget that the greatest achievement in science in the 20th century, the splitting of the atom, was used to vaporize 2 cities off the map and settle a tribal dispute. Science is merely a tool. I'm growing very weary of those clinging to science like the old Catholics clung to the church as if the tool were going to save us from ourselves. Still inquisitions, still crusades. Science is the same, merely a structure, a tool. You have too much faith in the structure that it will somehow absolve us of our humanity. Science and reason, let's talk about them. We have seen how science is employed in the hands of the monkeys. How about reason? What happened in the land of continental philosophy? Genocide, train tracks, furnaces. The end result of reason, a tool, like science all the same, in the hands of humanity, was the settling of tribal disputes. Name your favorite Spanish philosopher. Okay, now your favorite Latvian philosopher. Okay, now your favorite German philosopher. Some places are known for their wines, their cheeses, some for their production of philosophy. It just comes out of the region, like from out the soil. If Germany, with all its wisdom, much wisdom brings much vexation, could not undo its tribal nature, restrained by reason, and America, empowered by science, could not undo its, what exactly is your faith in science for?
If science is the search for truth, and truth can never really be, I shouldn't say that, truth should never be an engine of conflict, because no two people should disagree on something which is objectively true.
Wittgenstein and the Rhino. Germany and the Jews. America and the Japanese. Why couldn't they simply agree on what was objectively true?
Then, in some sense, search for truth is searching for a common ground where we can all exist and live without contradicting or attacking each other.
Do you have a hope that there's a lot of common ground to be discovered?
Sure. I mean, if we continue scientifically, we are discovering truth, and in that discovering common ground on which we can all agree. That's one reason why I think caring about science, if you have a culture which cares very deeply about science, that's a culture which is not necessarily bound to endure unwarranted internal conflict. I think that's one reason that I'm so passionate about science, is its search for universal ground.
According to the story, a united human race in the generations following the Great Flood, speaking a single language and migrating eastward, comes to the land of Shinar. There, they agree to build a city and a tower tall enough to reach heaven. God, observing their city and tower, confounds their speech so that they can no longer understand each other, and scatters them around the world.
Well, I think Jordan Peterson is very anti-establishment in a lot of his beliefs. He's an unconventional thinker.
Jordan Peterson is not anti-establishment, like your uncle Brett is not anti-establishment. There is a kind of older establishment type that wishes by reason, by God, that academia, that establishment could be different. They are establishment professors who have been kicked from their establishment motherlands, U of T, Evergreen State, and mourn for its loss like all good diasporic witnesses. I think, rather than anti-establishment, it is old establishment thinking against new establishment. The things Peterson and Brett are about, as it were, inductive reasoning, systematic thinking, and the other suggestions dark web thinkers pushing 50 plus are insinuating, would not be considered radical in almost any generation of thinkers for centuries before us. Only now are they being challenged by a mob of idiots who have taken over the marketplace. The tragedy of the commons has become the common tragedy. I think of Brett and Jordan less as anti-establishment than the old establishment type Enlightenment-style thinkers being forced out by new establishment critical race theory type thinkers. Is old establishment anti-establishment? I suppose if the establishment has changed, but suddenly we are at the ship of Theseus paradox.
Language often destroys our ability to think. I watched your podcast with Noam Chomsky, and I think one interesting thing which he discussed was how language is more used to develop thoughts within our own head than it is used to communicate those thoughts with others.
Wittgenstein invites readers to imagine a community in which the individuals each have a box containing a beetle. No one can look into anyone else's box, and everyone says he knows what a beetle is only by looking at his beetle. If the beetle had a use in the language of these people, it could not be as the name of something, because it is entirely possible that each person had something completely different in their box, or even that the thing in the box constantly changed, or that each box was in fact empty. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously is a sentence composed by Noam Chomsky in his 1957 book Syntactic Structures as an example of a sentence that is grammatically correct but semantically nonsensical. The sentence was originally used in his 1955 thesis, The Logical Structure of Linguistic Theory, and in his 1956 paper, 3 Models for the Description of Language. Although the sentence is grammatically correct, no obvious understandable meaning can be derived from it, and thus it demonstrates the distinction between syntax and semantics. We should find it curious that think, a verb, follows the same syntax as chew. Think, thinking, thought. Chew, chewing, chewed. The grammar of verbs. Is thinking really an action? Do I think like I chew? Be skeptical of language, Zev. Lovingly yours, Wax Costanza.